So if we start thinking about, like accountability related issues, right, related to misconduct, right? The first like kind of like primary or gateway kind of issue, right, is like how do we make police departments aware of problems? Because without this ability of going on, right, like if I have an encounter with an officer and I think, he's kind of being like a jerk to me, right? He's not giving me a fair shake, he's making fun of my mom or whatever. I can say like, hey, you're kind of being, a jerk and be like, all right, whatever. Or maybe like he would just like give me another ticket, for like doing that just because he could, right? So the primary way though, so if we like are, unhappy, we think the officer maybe is being like, say discourteous, right? Or, is otherwise like unprofessional. Or it could be something more severe, right? We can maybe have an issue with like, a use of force kind of thing, right? Like, pulled me out of the car and he shoved my head into like the hood of the car, right? Or he put the cuffs on too tight, or something like that, right? There are instances then where we're unhappy, or I feel like I'm being demeaned. I was talked down to, right? I was given like these sort of like forceful commands, or maybe someone, there was like the threat of force was used, in order to get me to comply, and it made me scared or fearful, right? So each of these, right, are going to be could be classified as like abuses of discretion. But I can't necessarily report that to the officer, right? Because I suspect the officer probably isn't going to do anything about it, right? He's going to tell me to get over it. So one way that we at least attempt to hold people accountable, right, is to report this to a police department, right? And so we use this through a complaint system. So let's take a moment to like sort of visualize, what happens with a police complaint system, right? So we know that we are going, in order to have anything, right? In most cases, right, we're going to have this encounter, right? I don't know why I drew a circle. That was kind of dumb. We'll erase it. So we have a police and civilian encounter, right? So this is the starting point. Usually, if I don't have like an encounter with an officer or someone else with the police department, right, I don't really have anything to complain about, right? I guess I could complain about something, but if I don't have the encounter, if it has nothing to do with police, right, it's pretty limited options, right? Or maybe I just want to say like, I don't like police. Like, well, okay, that's fine. So if we have this encounter with police, right? Something happens, right, where on one pathway, right, we think no complaint. So we choose, nothing to go into the complaint, right? Or we can take this other pathway where we have this desire to complain. So if we think about, reasons like, maybe why I want to complain, right, is that maybe I want, the officer, corrected. Maybe that's because I'm seeking justice. Or, maybe I want to file a complaint, right? Because I want to, like, I just didn't like the encounter and I want to retaliate against the officer, right? There are many possible reasons for that. So once I have this desire to complain coming in, right, there is, it's actually submitted and it's reviewed. And there's a decision at that point, right, whether there's going to be a further investigation Or on this end, right, there's no investigation. Now, this is, arguably like a simple kind of, process, right, where, we sort of consider like we have this sort of decision tree that comes out about how complaints are handled. But the part it's kind of interesting is like, why do we care about this, right? Why is this actually like important, right? Well, there's a lot of utility as to why like police complaints matter. And so if we think about why we want to collect this kind of information, one, we use the complaint system because they're useful for tracking misconduct. This is for like an academic purpose, for like a research kind of thing, but it's also, something that's useful for like to keep track of like say like, public mood toward a toward a department. So, if I'm having a high number of complaints, maybe that means like the department isn't happy or the public isn't happy, right? I could also use it, right, to maybe like see what people complain about because maybe this is something that I can, revise like some training or clarify policy. Right, which is pretty important, right? Because if I see that a certain number of complaints are happening, maybe it's related to use of force in certain situations, maybe that means I can do that, right? I think the other part too, right, is that this is also good because if I address a complaint, right, this might prevent, a later lawsuit. Because if I don't have a complaint system, maybe instead what I want to do, right, is to prevent like a later lawsuit. Because if I don't have a complaint option, maybe I'll just go to court or something like that. So, the use of a complaint system then is to prevent something from escalating from civil action. The other part that kind of comes in is right. Maybe I'll find problematic officers based off the complaints, right? Because if I see a certain name pop up all the time or a certain kind of behavior popping up all the time, right? That might mean that someone needs to have a talking to, or maybe like let go. Absolutely, right? So these complaints, then, even though they, on their face seem trivial, right, are pretty like critical to police accountability and operations for a police department. So with that, we'll stop.